Garland Nixon, who joins us now. Garland, it's quite a to-do about a weather balloon, isn't it?
Well, George, if you look at the circumstances in totality, in totality, as Bakhmut and town after town falls in Ukraine, and official after official resigns, as it certainly appears that we're facing the mother of all debacles in Ukraine. It looks like the national security state has cooked up the equivalent of a large white canvas version of the Steele dossier to guide conservatives gently away from the Ukraine debacle and come up with a new discussion, which is let's point them towards China and try to put this whole debacle behind us in Ukraine. And that it seems like a major distraction to me, and it's pretty preposterous.
Now, Joseph Heller would have fun with it, though. If this balloon was a clear and present danger to the security of the United States, why wasn't it brought down on the very first day that it was spotted? Why was it allowed to traverse, presumably collecting all the information it wanted or was able to, from right across the United States, from coast to coast? Why was it allowed to sail over Canada uninterrupted?
Yes.
And if it was such a danger, why didn't the United States military bring it down?
Exactly. And we now find, which is fairly easy to deduce, that they've been tracking it across the ocean and across Canada. And so they knew it was coming. So the question is, if it's a terrible threat to our safety that the Chinese can monitor the barometric pressure above the strategically critical but very small town of Billings, Montana, I would have thought that they would have deduced this beforehand and shot this thing down, maybe 1,000 miles or so before it even hit the coast, since they were watching it. But of course, if they'd done that, then they wouldn't have they wouldn't be able to plaster all of the news websites and 24 hours a day talk about this horrific, frightening balloon.
I mean, it's not so much wag the dog as wave the balloon, burst the balloon. According to John Pilger, it took several sidewinders to actually hit it with an F-16. Doesn't say much for the top guns.
Well, and in reality, I mean, if we look at it, I've been doing a little bit of research today. We find that apparently this happened twice during the Trump administration. This has happened earlier in the Biden administration. Apparently, there's another weather balloon that floated over South America here in the last few days. So it doesn't appear that an errant weather balloon drifting in a westerly direction across the United States seems to be a strange thing to happen. Here in Maryland, where I live, the Maryland, Washington, Baltimore area, for a number of months, a few years back, and people can find that online. As you drove across the bay, you'd look up in the sky and see this big white blimp thing, and it was a Pentagon balloon that apparently was, being tested. So the idea of balloons floating around is not really that odd. It just appears that this particular instance of a balloon floating across the United States is opportunistic. Otherwise, I mean, if you think about it right now, the fall of Bakhmut, of Soledar, the Ukraine project is collapsing all around itself. In fact, if they weren't covering the balloon, there may be those who may wonder why they're not covering the massive protest in the Ukraine and France. So it seems to me a big part of Balloongate, as it were, is to distract us from the many problems that the neocons have brought forth, and they're all coming together at one time. So they're going to refocus and say, okay, we're done with all of these disasters. Let's try to start a bigger disaster in the Pacific.
Well, you don't need to be a weatherman to know which way the wind blows, as Bob almost put it. And the wind is blowing ill through the Straits of Taiwan and the South China Sea and in the Pacific. This presumably is, as I mentioned earlier, a harbinger of a great storm to come with China once they get their backside kicked in Ukraine. Where else to go for another war but China? That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Certainly, I think we keep an eye on Iran and China. The neocons are up to, in North Korea. They're up to miscreant activity all over the globe. But there are a number of problems because they're not taking into people aren't taking into account what the fallout. And I'm reticent to use that word, but we'll use it metaphorically. What the political fallout, the economic fallout, will be from the we'll call it the mother of all debacles in Ukraine. Certainly, there will be political fallout in Europe. Their economies are crashing. The U.S. economy can't be far behind. So to have a disaster of this magnitude, they're going to have to regroup from that disaster in order to then focus their ire towards the Pacific. And I don't think the regrouping is going to be easy as they would like it to be. I think the neocons and a lot of people in the U.S. press think that they can just walk up to Russia on any given Tuesday and say, okay, we've gone on far enough with this. We're going to present some options for you to choose, and then we can go on about our way. And I think the Russians are going to be in a position where they can impose the outcome on not only Ukraine, but on the issue of NATO expansion in their region. I think that the Europeans are going to be hard pressed to try to hold on to this idea that they can surround Russia with military hardware, which, might I add, is rapidly running out as they throw it into the giant Russian trash compactor in Ukraine. So it's not going to be as easy to disentangle from this debacle as they would like it to believe. They would like us to believe, so they can move on to a far larger debacle.
Yeah, and if they know they're losing, Russia surely knows they're winning. So the cost of any settlement has risen exponentially from what it would have been the day before the 25th of February last year. And it seems to me that the price that will have to be paid is now no longer restricted to Ukraine. I think the promise made to Gorbachev by George Bush Sr. Is back on the table. The promise that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east of Germany is now back on the agenda, and the Russians will not be satisfied until at least new security arrangements are made east of Germany which satisfy them, and which Putin called for as long ago as the Munich conference in 2008. He laid out there the red lines, laid out there the ways in which a security architecture which served the needs of both sides in the eastern part of Europe could easily have been agreed. But hubris, drunk on power at the end of the Cold War, the NATO, West, United States, call it what you will, was not able or willing to agree to that. Let's turn to the political front, Garland. I know there's a certain element of repetition in my next question to you, but is Joe Biden all there? Does he really know? Did he see this balloon? Or does he see balloons floating by him most days of the week?
As we get closer to 2024, the questions about Joe Biden are increasingly not about whether he'll run or whether he's competent, because I think those questions have been sufficiently answered by his actions, his frequently, giving speeches and then wandering around on the stage for considerably longer than it took him to give the speech to try to find an exit from the stage. I think the question now is how the Democratic Party is going to get rid of Joe Biden. And of course, to get rid of Joe Biden, they first must get rid of Kamala Harris, because she is a political disaster waiting to happen. They have to hide her right now. She's constantly hidden. So the Democratic Party is in a real mess in figuring out how to get rid of Joe Biden. Meanwhile, you have to add this factor, and it's very important. Donald Trump has been getting louder and louder in his pushback against the Ukraine conflict. He recently came out and said, we must demand an end to this. So he's now joining the anti-war voices. He's joining the chorus for an end to the conflict. Now, of course, Donald Trump would add in within 24 hours, I could end it. But you would expect anyone who's running for president to make that kind of a claim. So how the Trump factor and the Trump voice calling for an end to the Ukraine war affects the Democrats' ability to find a replacement for the Biden-Harris debacle will be quite interesting. And one could argue the whole balloon gate thing may be an attempt by the deep state and by people in power to try to start distracting us. They got to get us away from thinking about Ukraine, because that is turning out to be a situation that they've lost control of, and they don't have the ability to control the narrative on it anymore.
Are the papers in Delaware, the ones behind the Corvette, safely in the custody of one Hunter Biden, crackhead of Wilmington, Delaware? The ones in Biden's other multi-million-dollar properties? He's done rather well for a blue-collar Democrat who, when he first entered the Senate, claimed he was the poorest man ever to enter the Senate. Well, he ain't poor now. He's got lots of mansions, and they're finding classified documents under every sofa in every one of them. Could that be one of the ways of forcing him out?
I certainly think so. You know, what's interesting about this whole classified document situation is, in the beginning, when they did the big raids on Donald Trump, and Trump said, look, everybody does this. This is nothing strange. Well, since we found Mike Pence with classified documents, Biden, has classified documents under every nook and cranny of property that he owns. We've also found out that for some strange reason, his son was paying him $50,000 a month for a house that's probably worth about far less than 1/10, maybe 1/20th of what was actually being paid. So that appears to be clearly a money laundering operation. But we know the tax bureau will not ever look into that. So the bottom line is, I think this canceled out, rather than, if truly this was about justice, they'd say we must continue the investigation on Trump, and we must continue the investigation on Biden, and we must continue the investigation on Pence or whoever. But instead, they will cancel each other out, and there will be no classified document scandals of consequence addressed and adjudicated by anyone.
Let me go left field on you, Garland.
Okay.
I think they're going to run Michelle Obama as the Democratic candidate next time.
I think Gavin Newsom. I think they're going to look, because, for starters, the national figures in the Democratic Party and the ruling elite class is thoroughly discredited. And as the Ukraine debacle, expands, it's going to be difficult for anybody who in any way is related to this to be able to run for presidential office. Michelle Obama doesn't have enough background. I don't know that the deep state would trust her that she may make some decisions that they're not happy with. My thoughts are they're looking at Gavin Newsom out in California. They know he will go along with the game plan, and that they look for someone from the state, like maybe the governor of Michigan, I believe, Whitmer. Those are the two names that I'm hearing floated around Washington, D.C. on K Street quite frequently.
And it will be them against Trump or DeSantis. What's your take on that?
I personally think it will be Trump. I don't know that DeSantis will run against Trump, but it would be Trump, because Trump has a large contingent of voters who are very solid. I also believe that Donald Trump is doing something that's really strategically brilliant right now. He recognizes that the Ukraine conflict is getting less popular, and that as it falls apart, it will be recognized as a debacle of as I keep calling it, the mother of all debacles. And I think he realizes that once he gets out in front of it, he'll be able to say, I tried to tell everyone, but they wouldn't listen to me. They should listen to Trump. And I think Donald Trump may look at the Ukraine debacle as his ticket to the White House. And it will be hard for Democrats that, uniformly supported this mess to get over that hump. So, yeah, I think Donald Trump, and add this, the mainstream Republican Party was on board with this. Donald Trump is going to look like the prophet who told everyone what was coming. Once again, if only they'd have listened to Trump. So I think the situation is setting up for Donald Trump to once again to be in a strong position to win the White House in 2024.
Here's a question, Garland, just before I let you go, from Ian in Cardiff. Do you know what's going on with the American tanks and other equipment coming in from the Taliban to Russia? This is the vast, vast military camp which Joe Biden left when he stole like a thief in the night from Afghanistan. Apparently the Taliban done a big parade of all this military equipment and then shipped it to Russia. What a movie that would make.
Well, what we're looking at now with the tanks, it's interesting because if you read, once again, if you go to the mainstream media and you see these articles on the tanks going to Russia, but if you read down the articles, what you find is that these are basically orders for tanks. Even lately, they said they're going to provide long-range missiles to attack Russia for Ukraine. But if you read the articles, you find that there are orders that are being sent to the defense contractors for tanks or whatever the case may be, and that there are also other countries that are in line in front of Ukraine. So what we basically have is a public relations push to use the term tanks. And as long as you only read the headlines, then you'll believe that there are sometime soon there's tanks heading towards Russia and long-term missiles and things of that nature. But if you read the articles, you'll find that these things are being ordered from the military industrial complex. And the comparison to Afghanistan that I use is Afghanistan was an ATM. It was an automatic teller machine for money laundering for the ruling elite. And now Ukraine is, in fact, the new ATM for the ruling elite. And that's the story on these tanks. And even if they sent them, they wouldn't do them any good. But apparently the timing on the tanks is to ensure that the conflict is over long before these tanks are even, they start welding them on the assembly lines.
You're a star, Garland Nixon. Thanks for joining us.